Joran. Say hello.
Hello. Hi. I'm glad to be here.
I'm super happy to be here. I've been a huge fan of your videos for a long time. I've been like almost like creepily. I was like, oh, he never responded to any of the stuff that I posted because I definitely freaked him out.
I had a moment. I was scrolling through it and I was like, hey, I know that guy. That's when we got in contact. I just didn't notice somehow.
That's amazing. So yeah, huge fan of your videos. So let's get started. I'm going to give you the first one. Give me your first game.
My first game is Final Fantasy X, which is, I think, kind of still one of the most opulent games ever made. Ooh, there's obviously games that look a lot like better if we're talking like purely technical, but I don't think there's a game that feels quite as expensive in the exact way that Final Fantasy X does. And I think that's just such a special feeling, especially for a console as old as the PlayStation 2. So it's, in my opinion, like such a good way to like start with a PlayStation 2 and immediately be like, oh, so like anything is possible on this thing.
Absolutely. Now, I haven't played any Final Fantasy game, so can you give me an idea of what, because I know each game is a little bit different, right?
Yeah, it's just a bunch of RPGs. They share a name and a studio making them, but even in theming, there's a bunch that are like classic European style medieval RPG. There's a bunch that are very futuristic. Final Fantasy VII is a good example of that. Final Fantasy X is a bit in the middle. It's weird. It's hard to explain. I think there's kind of a Final Fantasy game for everyone because they're all different.
So would you say, is Final Fantasy X, like, is that somewhere that you would have someone start if they've never played any of the other games?
Yeah, I guess. Final Fantasy X is that point where they're modern enough that it doesn't feel like they hate you. There were a bunch of RPGs that I wanted to put on this list, but most of them feel like they hate you, and that's not the case for Final Fantasy X. It's mostly a fair game.
Okay, so is that it for Final Fantasy X?
I guess. I think the opulence is like the most important part of it. It's such an absurdly expensive game. Maybe you've seen the cutscene before of the main character Tidus. He's like standing in this pool, and it's lit from like underneath the water.
Wow.
And it's just it's so absurdly beautiful looking. It's such a statement piece. And I think that's just like a perfect way to start with a console. It kind of makes you feel like you can just see anything or experience anything on this. There's no game I can think of, even now, that feels expensive and opulent in the same way that Final Fantasy X does. I think it's still really special in its presentation. There are little areas in that game that are as detailed as entire hour-long dungeons in other games, and you're there for like 10 minutes and then you move on, and it has like its entire like atmosphere and music is all custom made for like a little 10-minute bit, and then you just never see it again, and it's just this constant like, I can't believe there's just 50 hours of this, and it never loses that tempo of showing you new, unbelievably beautiful stuff, and that's really exciting.
It's funny you mentioned cutscenes. The only Final Fantasy cutscene, as a complete noob casual who knows nothing about Final Fantasy, is the laugh meme.
You probably shouldn't laugh anymore.
Yeah, that's a classic. And I promise it's less weird in context, but that's also asking you to like have like 10 or 20 hours of context, so it really makes sense that it like isolated from everything else became a meme. I promise it makes sense if you're playing the game.
I'm sure.
But only in context.
Would you recommend that I play that game without knowing any other Final Fantasy games?
Oh yeah, it doesn't matter at all. Does
Sick.
not matter. It's like, can I start at like Tony Hawk 4? Like, yeah, whatever.
All right.
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Speaking of which, that's the perfect segue into my first game, which is Tony Hawk's Underground.
That's a good one.
I've said this before. There's 3 series that I love more than anything on planet Earth as far as video games go, and that is Tony Hawk, Crash Bandicoot and Dark Souls. Those are my 3 main ones. You can supplement Resident Evil or Silent Hill kind of in there as well. Every once in a while, they'll kind of overtake one or another. But as far as series that really impacted me in a big way, it's Tony Hawk, Crash, and Dark Souls. And
that totally makes sense to me. You're such a Crash guy. Like, you've never even talked about it on your channel, but it just makes sense to me that you're a Crash guy.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah, I've got a big Aku Aku tattoo on my forearm.
No shit. That's so cool.
Yeah, I do. So yeah, big Crash fan. So, and the reason that I picked Tony Hawk is I didn't know if I was even going to choose Tony Hawk, because the idea for this video was I want, a dozen games that you can't experience better any other place, and the 1 and 2 remake for PS4 and PS5 is truly a masterwork that I've put so many hundreds of hours into.
Oh wow!
Like, I've almost platinumed it, and I haven't, because there's like one XP challenge it's a little over the top. But Tony Hawk Underground is a completely different thing. It's not as arcadey as the first 3, and 4 starts to kind of have some, like, there's not really plot, but you're interacting with NPCs and you are kind of free roaming, so you can tell that the series is getting there. Whereas Tony Hawk's Underground, it's not a skateboarding RPG exactly. It's more of like a skateboarding Last of Us almost, where it's like, this is a very it's a very narratively dense, like, cinematic. Your hopes, much like Ellie's hopes and dreams can get crushed in Last of Us, your hopes and dreams get destroyed by Eric Sparrow, who is your backstabbing best friend who pees his pants in the beginning of Tony Hawk Underground 2 because he's a bitch.
Remember Hawaii, building jump, helicopter? That was some sick footage. Too bad no one ever saw it.
You backstabbing, mob-flipping cockroach.
Hey!
Something just activated in my brain. I know that game. That's the one where you can get off your board, right?
Yes, that's the first.
I know that one. Yeah, I do know that one.
It's the first game where you can get off your board. Eric Sparrow steals your, I think it's a McTwist over a helicopter in Hawaii, and Eric Sparrow steals your footage, and he gets sponsored over you. Anyway, Tony Hawk Underground, I legitimately go back and play this game once every probably 2 years max. Like, I don't go more than 2 years without doing another run of Tony Hawk Underground.
Wow. Isn't that, like, replayable? I've never played much Tony Hawk. Is there a lot of, like, creativity in how you can, like, approach everything, or is it more skill based, where you just need to figure out how you can do stuff?
I would say it's more along the lines of skill-based arcadey kind of stuff. The reason that I love replaying it isn't necessarily because I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go get immersed again in Tony Hawk's Underground. It's like, no, I love a game that it's a flow state game. I can put on a YouTube video or a podcast or whatever and just chill and just, like, play Tony Hawk and just, like, tear it apart. And that's why I really like playing those games, and I've replayed them countless times. So that's, my first pick, Tony Hawk's Underground.
That's a good one. I like that. I purposefully didn't put a lot of horror on my list. There was so much horror I wanted to put on it, but I'm like, I'm sure we're gonna be fine. He's gonna put a lot of horror on it. And now your first game is a skate game, and my confidence is lessened.
I didn't want to be too, I didn't want to, like, go too heavy on that.
Yeah, no, same. I tried to get something kind of balanced, and still there's, like, so many different little, like, fun things that the PlayStation 2 and its games were very good at, that maybe there's still going to be some stuff that's, like, super obvious that we're just not going to be able to fit on, because there's so many little fun niches that the PlayStation 2 was really good at.
I know.
Oh,
exactly.
Speaking of, my second game is Chulip, and it's awful.
Chulip. I saw Joran's list before doing this. I saw Chulip, and I was like, well, I mean, yeah.
Where else are you gonna get a Chulip? Like, point me to a Chulip type game on any other console. It's this really magical little weird game where you need to impress your crush by having a really big heart full of love, And the way you can train your heart to be big is by kissing everyone in town. So every little character has a little puzzle associated with them. And if you solve that puzzle and make them happy, you can give them a little smooch. And then the magical tree with a face that's outside of town is like, oh, he's doing pretty good. That's good. I'm going to make his heart bigger. And then your heart becomes bigger. And it's really hard. And the puzzles are all like really obtuse. And if people aren't happy and you try to kiss them, you get hit. And sometimes if you do things right, the game's just like, you're getting hit. And if you die, you have to restart your day. And it's really hard, but it's also incredibly charming. It's got a great atmosphere. And I think it's a really good example of one of those types of games that just was only possible in this generation, where you can do anything with graphics, but it's in standard definition, so it's not super expensive to develop yet. And that resulted in a lot of really interesting, weird, almost experimental games that could be made on a pretty big scale and released pretty widely, because there was just a huge demand for PlayStation 2 games. And I think Chulip's a really good example of that, of just a game that you really couldn't see like blossoming in the way that it did in any other kind of ecosystem. But it was such a unique ecosystem at the time that these strange little weird, almost aggressively obtuse games could still get made with a lot of polish and a pretty big budget and just like a huge studio of all these talented people working on it. I think that's really special. That's something that I really value, these really expressive experiences that don't necessarily only go for satisfaction in a player, but also for like different types of emotions. And that's always a big risk. And the PlayStation 2 was like a great era to go for like a risky game. And that's why Chulip's on here for me.
Hell yeah. It is about kissing and all the other things, but it's also about equity and working class struggle in a weird way as well. Like you come to town with your dad and you're both like lower class, and there's like,
oh yeah, and people are just straight up like gross. You're poor. That I don't like. The first characters you meet, they're just like they're like literally like loudly whispering, and they're talking about you, and that's your introduction to this world.
Yeah, it's amazing. I got to play. I didn't play all of it. God, I definitely did not play all of it. But I did play probably an hour or so of it when I was working on my Rule of Rose video, because they went on to make Rule of Rose.
Oh yeah, I mentioned that in my. I made a video about this, by the way.
Yes.
I mentioned that too. It's such an insane track record. Chulip, Rule of Rose, bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Like what a run.
Yeah, it was a it was a great run. That is amazing. Also, the voices in Chulip are so neat and funny and adorable.
Oh yeah, it's like a weird like Banjo-Kazooie type thing.
It's
but
like Simlish.
I think with actual Japanese, and they're all pitch shifted, but like down instead of up, so it's all like really unpleasant. It's great.
Is it Japanese?
I think it's Japanese, or like parts of sentences like mushed together.
Yeah.
I think it is a real language chopped up, but I think that's part of the charm of this game. There's so many things you're like, what is that? What am I looking at right now? What's going on?
Oh my god. Okay. So, my next game, speaking of games that can only really exist on the PlayStation 2, you're not going to get a Manhunt on PS4 or PS5, or God forbid a PS3. It's a puzzle game. It's like a stealth puzzle game at the end of the day. But you're rewarded with like the most gruesome, over-the-top murder you could ever see. It was called a murder simulator by a multitude of news outlets, and it had a lot of controversy. Manhunt 1 and 2. I think Manhunt 2 is still banned in lots of territories. And the reason that I think this game is so interesting is that it really is kind of a time capsule to where Rockstar was in the 2000s.
Oh yeah, they were a nasty company for a while. Like even all the way up to Max Payne 3, it's just like, oh, you guys are like, what's going on? You're like gross. You got weird ideas over there.
Dude, Rockstar were like the edgelords of I guess 6th and 7th generation. And
Oh yeah, yeah. It's hard to forget now, even though like GTA 5 like pretty edgy, but it's like nothing in comparison to what they were doing before that.
No.
They were really wild back then.
Essentially, the story with Grand Theft Auto, and I might be mixing this up slightly, but from what I understand, they worked with some kind of fancy like PR guy who told them essentially that controversy is the best thing you can possibly do to grow your brand and to get a lot of eyes on you. So they specifically and on purpose leaked fake news to journalists and got an unbelievable amount of controversy around GTA 3 before the game had even come out. And
I love that.
It seems like they just kept working what was working. And like you had Vice City where like, you know, you're running around as an 11-year-old shooting people's heads off and blood shoots everywhere. And it's just like, and you take their money and it's hilarious. Right. And then you've got San Andreas where you're riding around on a BMX bike with a chainsaw. And then you've also on the other side of that got games like Manhunt, which again, lots of people still to this day refer to as a murder simulator. I think it's more of a puzzle game, but you have Manhunt and you've got Bully at the same time, which is like...
Oh, I forgot about Bully. That's right.
Yeah, which is the opposite of what a lot of people think. A lot of people think that game is about being a bully, but it's actually like a revenge game.
Yeah, I played that game a lot when I was young. I was very surprised to hear about its reputation like many years later, because bully starts with you entering school and being bullied, and then later in years I learned, oh, people just thought that was like a harassment simulator or something.
Yeah.
It was a really weird reputation for a game that is like very obvious in its message.
Very, yes. Yes.
Like it's Rockstar. It's very obvious. It's not subtle.
Yes, exactly.
And not good at that.
Yes, and I really think that like for someone like me who I've always described myself as I like extremes. So like when it comes to music, I am incredibly into gore grind and death metal and all this other kind of shit. But at the same time, I'm also really into pop music because while it's really extreme for a band like Exhumed to have like fake severed heads and like play like, you know, 300 BPM like death grind, it's also really extreme to see Lady Gaga dancing on top of a Trans Am that is on fire in the rain. So like, I just like stuff that's big and extreme and over the top, and there is so much of that on the PlayStation 2, whether that's Manhunt or fucking Leisure Suit Larry. PS2 is a home for, just like you said, like off-the-wall weird stuff that you don't really see a lot of other places. And when you want to talk about being extreme, you know, Manhunt is definitely it, and I think it's an important piece of history. Just for like Rockstar now is a studio that they can go a decade without making a game, and the second they put their game out, they're going to make more money than anyone's ever made ever. And
oh yeah,
and they somehow got there by being like almost like a grindhouse game studio.
I think the history itself is really valuable as well. It's a really good way of like kind of feeling out what was like the general public's look on video games at the time. I think the reaction that Rockstar's games at that time got is a really good example of that. I think it's really interesting to look back at like all these articles. I think there were like Senate hearings or something, like politicians got involved with this stuff, and it was all based on misconceptions. I think it's a really valuable time capsule, not just the game itself, but the entire reaction around it is such like a, this is what it was like in the mid-2000s, and this is how not seriously the medium was taken. And in that way, I think it's almost good that it happened, because it's just a really clear, like a crystal clear look at how the world looked at video games back then. And Rockstar pushing the envelope was just like the perfect time to be doing that. Because they got some real good reactions out of it.
Absolutely, they did. So what do you got next?
Let's see. I want to switch it up and not do two like weird artsy games in a row. So I'm gonna go with Devil May Cry for this one. I think this is a good good thing to add on to what you were saying. Devil May Cry is also a game that really wasn't possible before. This is also a really good example of you can just do anything on the PlayStation 2. That thing can run anything. And here's this game and this main character with just so much attitude and this rock music and loud guns and weapons, and you're collecting blood orbs to level up. It's a kind of attitude, I think, that didn't really exist back in the day before the PlayStation 2. The only thing I can really think of is something like Deadly Creatures, which is like vaguely similar in look and feel. It's fun. It's a fun game. I think Rob Zombie did a song for the sequel. But,
you're thinking of Nightmare Creatures.
Nightmare Creatures. That's the one I'm
Yes.
thinking. Deadly Creatures, I think, is a Wii game where you play as a spider, actually. that is something that exists.
It is. You are exactly on the money. You are exactly right. Yes.
The final boss of that game is just a human. It's great. But
Okay.
Devil May Cry is like it's got
You might have
this
just given
attitude.
me a future video. If I do a video, if I do a video on that, I will absolutely shout you out because that sounds like hilarious.
Thank you. But so Devil May Cry is this game, and it's got such a fun, abrasive attitude, and people always say like you can do anything with any limitations, and I'm not sure if that's entirely true because I don't know if a Devil May Cry would have worked on the PlayStation 1. It needed a specific amount of detail in its sound and in its look and in its camera and in its lighting to really be what it is. And it just kind of like nails it. Like first try, it's already perfect. The way that game opens with the big castle and you walk in, you've got all these camera angles that showing off the beautiful graphics. And the attitude is just immediately so clear. And that's a great like sixth generation thing. Games got attitude. I think we talked about that with Tony Hawk. We talked about it with oh god, I forgot the name of the game. Manhunt.
Who would have thought the guy who I got into because he talked about Okage is actually really into opulence in video games?
I love maximalism. I think it's a great way to express ideas. I don't think everything needs to be maximalist. Something like Chulip obviously is pretty minimal and it really works within like its minimalist scale. But some things just work really well on a maximalist scale. And this was the first generation where you could really start doing that. And Devil May Cry is a great example of that, where like the location is just the coolest thing you've ever seen. The character is like the coolest guy you've ever seen. Every weapon just is the loudest gun you've ever heard. And every sword is just the most over-designed, awesome thing ever. And it shoots lightning also. And it's got the soul of your dead father in it or whatever. It's a type of attitude that suddenly could exist, and it's so energizing when you play that game. You can just really feel this kind of joy of expression for a kind of new metal age that was kind of starting. And that's why I think Devil May Cry is a perfect game to pick up when you're just starting with a PlayStation 2. It's another great way of kind of feeling like the air of the time, like how everything was and the way people like looked at things and what people thought was cool. Devil May Cry is such a good way to get a feel for that.
Totally. And what really speaks to your point about the game being something along the lines of like there's like a sense of passion or excitement within the game itself, like within it's like this new world, this new medium that it's able to do so much. And I think what further proves that point is that it was originally going to be Resident Evil 4. And
right, this is one of the 2 or 3 PlayStation 2 games that exist because of a version of Resident Evil 2.
Yes, Resident Evil 2, I think there was some for sure. And with this game, it was going to be what became Resident Evil 4, and Capcom went, no, but yes. Like, and they said, you're going to go over here and you're going to keep cooking and we're going to bring some other people here and we're going to do Resident Evil 4. There are certainly some things and some similarities and things that you can see there. And I'm also really happy that they didn't do that because like while Leon does have all this range of motion, and he's like kicking guys in the face and they're doing backflips, and like there is that sense of kind of over the topness in Resident Evil 4. It definitely is not nearly what Devil May Cry is.
Oh no, I think both games are like exactly at like the energy level they need to be.
I agree.
They're both like perfectly where they need to be.
So my next game, let's see. I did Manhunt before. Okay, here we go. This is a very strange pick because this is the only game in this pile that I have not actually finished, and in fact, I am playing through it right now. But I'm so taken by it that it might be recency bias, but I don't care. So the game is Run Like Hell.
I have never heard of this, actually. Okay.
This is a game that exists in this weird, uncanny valley of like, it's not so obscure that it's a very cool $200 game, but it's not so like saturated or like mass produced that it's like a $3 game. It's like a $20 game, $15-$20 game. And it was made by Interplay around the same time, either during the same time or around the same time that Interplay made another one of my favorite games that I'm going to do a video on soon, which is the Brotherhood of Steel. I love the PlayStation 2 Fallout game. It is so weird and different. And let's see, they made Brotherhood of Steel, so that was released 2 years after this. And the reason that I bring up Brotherhood of Steel so much is because there's a lot of shared DNA here. There are references to the Fallout world in Run Like Hell. Like there's a protein bar called like the Pit Boy Protein or something like that. And there's also, like Brotherhood of Steel, it is littered with product placement for the energy drink brand Balls Energy.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the other thing that these two games have in common is they both lean very heavily on what I call butt rock, where it's like Breaking Benjamin is in the soundtrack for Run Like Hell, and there's like
no way.
Yeah. There's like an alt chick with like a cool side cut and like spiky belt and stuff. Like it is now Brotherhood of Steel. That is kind of the whole game. Like Brotherhood of Steel is literally like, I call it butt rock Fallout. Like it is just Fallout, except everybody is like cool alt rocker guys. So Run Like Hell though, I was going and expecting another game that I've played a lot of already. On my channel, I've played a lot of what I would call military shooter horror games, where like the environments are all like metallic and you've got like a machine gun. So games like Extermination, games like...
now that you mention it, yeah.
Yeah, like Extermination, Cold Fear, The Thing even to some degree, are all games that are like, they're all action horror, but they're all like, you're like a military guy and, whatever. And that's what I thought Run Like Hell was going to be. However, I very quickly realized that Run Like Hell is an unbelievably cinematic... It's not so self-serious that it's like not fun. It is very fun, and there are lots of funny things in it. But it's self-serious in the way that like my outlook on art has always been, take your art seriously, don't ever take yourself seriously. And that's exactly what Run Like Hell nails. Where it's like these cutscenes and these characters. Oh, I forgot to mention, the voice acting cast is out of this world. The voice acting cast, and I recognize immediately, I was like, I feel like I recognize some of these voices, and I also feel like this isn't like the shitty voice acting that I'm used to. And the voice actors, we've got Lance Hendrickson, Kevin Michael Richardson, Clancy Brown, Michael Ironside, Brad Dourif, like Breaking Benjamin and 3 Days Grace have songs in it. So it's like really expensive. It was made on renderware, And it's like this really expensive, weird, cool game that I am just currently obsessed with. And I've been playing it for my channel. And sometimes I start playing a game for my channel and the notes, I write notes as I'm playing. And how good my notes are and how many notes I have tells me essentially whether or not this is going to be a good video. And I was just like tearing it up. Like this video, there's just this game, there's so much to talk about. And yeah, like I said, it's an alien. You're like on a spaceship and there's aliens that come onto the spaceship, and it almost has a Mass Effect vibe where like some of the soldiers that you work with are like these like alien humanoids in like armor, and they like speak English and stuff. It's in that kind of Mass Effect way. But again, all of this is happening in a game where you have constant cutscenes that are really, really expensive looking, and it came out in 2002 on the PlayStation 2. So
I'm looking at some footage right now. It does look really cool. I love the look of the renderware engine. It's got such a round, smooth look.
Yeah.
It's so good with light and shadows. I love how everything lights up when you shoot the gun in the game.
yeah.
Got little H.R. Giger inspired aliens walking around.
I
Looks
know.
Cool. I gotta check this out. This sounds like it should be more known than it is just based on how expensive it seems, like you said.
And these are all things that have added up to like, oh God, I cannot wait to finish this game and make a video on it. Because like every time I think more about it, the more I'm like, oh, that's so cool. So yeah, very excited. The PS2 version in Japan was released by Capcom, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, there's just like a lot of weird things about this game.
This has like your cool neighborhood friend had this game back in the day energy.
Yes.
Like it's kind of weird. It's the type of thing that's like vaguely in like the back of your memory when you're an adult and you're like, what was that game again? And you look up like military shooter alien base and you get like a million results and you just never find it again.
For me, that game was Dark Sector. I had a friend, my cousin had Dark Sector, and I was like, this game is so cool. And that's exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, it's not super in the zeitgeist, but like a lot of people have like a memory of that game being around. Yeah, but yeah, Run Like Hell didn't quite, interesting. Anyway, so that's Run Like Hell.
That's cool. Oh, I gotta check this out. Yeah, this looks cool.
Yeah, highly recommend it.
All right, my next game is Snake Eater.
Oh yeah.
I don't even know if I need to explain myself in any way. It's Snake Eater.
Yeah.
I think I do have a case for why you should play this on PlayStation.
Explain it to me.
It's fucking
I've
Snake
never
Eater. It's
played
the best
it.
game ever made.
Really? So check it out. Metal Gear Solid is my ultimate blind spot when it comes to video games. Like everybody has like some blind spots where there's like a series of movies that no one's ever seen or whatever. And for me, it's Metal Gear Solid. I'm only missing Subsistence. I have every other game physically, and I'm just like waiting for the time. Like I'm waiting for that call to come into my head to go, now it's not happening now. Let's do it. So I'm eagerly anticipating.
That's so fun. I'm obsessed with anything Kojima makes. I'm gonna try and sell you on it then.
All right.
I'm gonna make sure you boot up the first Metal Gear after this recording.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna be like, hey, so how did you think it go? And you just like log off. You just don't even say bye, and you boot up your PlayStation 1 and you start playing that baby. So Snake Eater is the third game. It's somewhere in the timeline. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
It's this military themed tactical espionage game, as the box art proudly proclaims. And the thing that really makes any Metal Gear game good is just you can feel like the presence of the person who's writing and directing these, which is Hideo Kojima. He's a really interesting guy. He's got all these like obsessions with like specific types of films and actors, and he's got this kind of eye for detail, this absurd eye for detail that, funnily enough, because people always say he should just go make movies, he does a lot of things in his games that are very movie-like. He also does a lot of things in his games that you just could not in a million years do in a movie because you're not interacting with them. There are so many things that, like, if you stand in the rain for too long in the first Metal Gear game, this is on the PlayStation 1, or you stay in the water for too long, your character gets a cold and you start sneezing, and then the enemies can hear you and they go like, what's that sound? And they walk up to you because they hear you sneezing.
Wow.
That's a PlayStation 1 game.
Yeah.
And there's all these moments like that. In the very first game, guards yawn sometimes, and you've got like a little map with their vision cone, but if you yawn, you don't have your eyes open, so their vision cone disappears for a second on the map. So you can run past guards if they yawn. And this is like the first like area of the game. Like the credits are still rolling and you're already like coming across all these unbelievable details that you can only experience if you're interacting with something. But at the other like end of the spectrum, it's also very movie-like, and it's got these cutscenes that are sometimes like 10-15 minutes long. The fourth Metal Gear game famously has a cutscene that's 90 minutes long.
What?
But I think, oh yeah, there's just like a 90-minute, there's just a movie as a cutscene in that game. It's really crazy. And just how far they push all this stuff is I think a very big part of the enjoyment of these games, as well as interacting with the consoles. Are you familiar with the Psycho Mantis fight? That's a really famous one.
I've heard of it. I know the name. I definitely heard it mentioned, but I don't know exactly what happens in it.
All right, so Psycho Mantis is a boss that you fight in the very first Metal Gear Solid game on the PlayStation 1, and he is a psychic. But he doesn't just read Snake's mind, he can read yours. So anytime you try to attack him, he's like, I can read your mind. I knew you were going to push that button, so I dodged. So what you got to do is you got to take your controller, take it out of the console, and plug it into the second port, and then he can't read your inputs anymore.
Whoa!
That's how you circumvent his omnipotence. By literally like fidgeting with the console itself. And there's stuff like this in Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater as well. There's a moment where you can defeat a boss by going into your console's clock and setting it forward a certain amount of time. Yes, I've
heard about that. Yes, he'll die of old age.
Yeah, it's like a really old character. And if you set your clock forward, I think it's 2 weeks. Or if you just pause the game for 2 weeks, I'm pretty sure that works as well. He just dies of old age. There is a kind of an interaction with the hardware that the game is playing on that is really unique to this series. And through stuff like that, you can really like feel the love of development. And I think that's such an important part of the Metal Gear Solid franchise. There's this unbridled joy that the game you're playing was made by the people who made it. They're just so excited to be working on like the piece of art that you're experiencing at that point. And that's why I think it's really important to play every Metal Gear game on the console it was originally released on. It still works. They're all brilliant games. They're some of the best games ever made. You're going to have an incredible experience either way. But playing a Metal Gear game on the console that it was designed for is a really unique experience, because at certain points you will just become part of the experience. You will become like the secret agent for a minute, or the spy for a minute, and you're going to have to fidget with real hardware or do something really weird. And that's just such a unique experience where the place that you're sitting in, that you're existing in, where you're looking at a screen becomes part of the game. It's so unbelievably unique, and that's why I recommend playing Snake Eater on a PlayStation 2.
That's awesome. I've played a little bit of the first game, and I remember being specifically blown away by the way that the radio frequencies work. And like, oh, this is how I interact with the other characters. Like, I just go to these frequencies. Like, that was so cool.
Oh yeah, they're always there. You can always call them, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't. What's up? What did you call me?" Like, they're always there. It's great. You can always chime in.
That's amazing. Okay, so for my next game, we are going to go with, let's break it up from horror a little bit. Let's go, okay, I'm not going to have a ton to say about this. Maybe I will. I recommend, it's a weird recommend because it's not necessarily a great game. However, I do recommend Crash Bandicoot Wrath of Cortex. This is the
That's the fourth one, right?
is
the direct sequel.
It is it is essentially it's the sixth game overall and the fourth mainline entry. So this is the sequel to Crash 3 Warped, essentially.
Gotcha.
It is the first for the PlayStation 2. I believe it is also the first mainline entry that was not made by Naughty Dog and was instead made by yes. It was instead made by Traveler's Tales, who would end up just like tearing the series into oblivion shortly after.
That's the Lego game guys, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think they made Lego Star Wars at least, which I did a video on.
Hey. So they did this, and essentially the story is that like Naughty Dog wanted to work natively for Sony, and they didn't want to be beholden to Universal anymore. So Sony bought them out, and then the same year that Traveler's Tales would release Wrath of Cortex, Naughty Dog with Sony would release Jak and Daxter, which is where they went instead.
That's right.
So this game is really not good. The loading screens are, I think, the longest that I've ever seen. I forget, but I think they're like 30 seconds or like something that's like absurdly long. Yeah,
That's pretty bad.
and they're not static. Like you're watching, it's like there's just a video essentially of Crash like falling down the screen, and you're just watching him, and it's so long. And the reason that I think this one is important is mainly for similar to Manhunt, kind of a educational experience. First of all, this is a like $2 game, so it's not an expensive one by any means, and it's very easy to find. You want to talk about how much disrespect I have for this game? I have the greatest hits with no booklet, so I definitely like.
That's nasty.
It's nasty. Yeah, it's really
disgusting.
nasty. But the reason that I think it's historically important is that this is kind of so. When the PlayStation 1 came out, there were an unbelievable amount of studios that either fell apart or closed or just had a really hard time because they had a really hard time adapting to 3D. Road Rash is a great example of this. I talked about that a little bit in my Road Rash 3D video. But there were an unbelievable amount of people who just had a very hard time moving to 3D. Now, Crash Bandicoot was 3D, but the environments were not. These are side scrollers essentially. So
yeah, it's like a side scroller, but you've got like the perspective's just different.
Right.
You just don't see it from the side.
Exactly. And there are like you are either moving forward, backwards, left, or right essentially. And you are on linear pathways to get to where you need to go, and that is essentially how it's set up. So Wrath of Cortex, this is an interesting situation where you have someone who is struggling to adapt to not essentially being on rails or being side scrolling. There's a lot more open environments and a lot more just kind of walk in different places. It's not completely like an open 3D world, but they're trying. You can kind of see them figuring out how they want to get there, almost like kind of flirting with a 3D world in a way. And you've got like
they did that later on, right? With the one where you're attached to Cortex.
Twinsanity, yes.
That's
which
the one.
Is a lot cooler. I think they both have similar trappings, but I think that like if I were doing a tier list, I would put Twinsanity above Wrath of Cortex, just because Twinsanity is so unique and weird, and the acapella soundtrack is hilarious, and it's just like a weird kind of cool game. Whereas Wrath of Cortex, like I got this game for Christmas when it came out, which would have been 2002. and I was born in 1993. By 1998, I was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. So by the time I was 5 years old, like there's photographic evidence of me at 5 years old playing Crash Bandicoot 1, 2, and 3 on the PlayStation 1. And so by the time this game came out, I was ready. Like I had already done so much in Crash Bandicoot. And I got it for Christmas, and I was like, "Oh my God, we have a PS2!" And this is the first Crash game on PS2. Oh my God! And I saw that the worlds were different, and everything looked better, and I could walk around freely a little bit more. And then it just sucked. I remember being so bummed because it was so not good, and I was like. It was like the first time I was really let down by a game that I was really excited for.
How old were you at this point?
I would have been 8 at this time, 8 or 9.
Oh wow, a game is gonna be pretty bad for an 8-year-old to go like, nah, this isn't it.
Well, and that's because I think I don't remember if it was if I went this isn't it, or if I just would get stuck, because there's lots of places in Wrath of Cortex where you can just get stuck. There's there's certain sections that are really hard. Like the games have always been somewhat hard, but I mean not somewhat, very hard. But the Wrath of Cortex, I remember, has these sections where you're rolling around in a ball, and it's really, really finicky and really easy to fall off of shit. And I'll bet you
that's such a classic we didn't know what else to do moment.
Yes, exactly. So
that's such a the developer team changed to someone else concept. They never do that in the first one. Yes.
So so there's things like that I remember just frustrated me so much, because I felt like, again, there is a correlation between Crash Bandicoot and Dark Souls being two of the most monumentous series in my life, and it's both of them have a tough but fair skill base to them that I find very rewarding and very enjoyable and engaging. And the first 3 Crash games, for the most part, even as a kid, I understood, I did that wrong. And you would learn and you do it better. And I remember, I have very little memory of this, but I do remember being a kid playing Wrath of Cortex and being like, "Fuck you, that's not fair," or that's not my fault. Wrath of Cortex, not an expensive game, and one that I definitely think people should check out, because it's worth kind of seeing, all these other games in one way or another are applauded for various reasons. And I think Wrath of Cortex is one where it's take a look at kind of where some people struggled to catch up to what the PlayStation 2 was offering.
Oh yeah, and I think there's a charm to a mediocre platformer. There's a lot of these on the PlayStation 2, because again, there was such a big market, so you could just make something and it would probably sell. I've always thought there was a charm to seeing a game that functions like the big dogs but isn't made by them. I always think that there's a certain underdog charm to that, and I can definitely see that in Wrath of Cortex as well. Plus, it's a really charming looking game. It's very colorful. It looks nice. They're doing a lot of fun stuff with water reflections. You can kind of feel that excitement of we're in the next generation of gaming.
You bring up a great point that I actually meant to mention, which is that the vibes in Wrath of Cortex are out of control. There is a vibe to that game that, I hear the music or I see that loading screen, God, and it's oh yeah, this has a feeling to it, and I do really appreciate that.
I am the feeling games guy. That's my main thing with games. I just want to feel them.
Oh, absolutely, hell yeah! All right, so what are you feeling?
Well, I'll move on to a game that's got a great, that's got some good feelings. Silent Hill, the third one.
There we go.
I was really debating which I was gonna put in, because 2 is obviously a monumental game. It's a game I talked about a bit in my most recent video on Wario Land 4. Silent Hill 2 was a game where I kind of started to realize that cameras were put in like specific places so you could feel things.
Yeah.
And that kind of led me into like a path of filmmaking that I'm still on. But if you want to just get a feel for the horror game on the PlayStation 2, I think it's Silent Hill 3. I think that's the best one. It's just so accomplished in every way. Team Silent had been making games for a long while at that point. Akira Yamaoka had been doing music for a very long time at that point. There's such just a confidence to Silent Hill 3. There's all these cutscenes in the beginning where you get these like tight close-ups of faces and they look unbelievable. Like, it's so weird to me that you can look at Heather Mason and just see like a real human face. Like, I'm pretty sure she has freckles.
Yeah.
Heather Mason has freckles, and I know this from her close-up in a PlayStation 2 game. That's unbelievable to me. It's just a beautiful, gorgeous game, and it is a lot of very influential creative people working at the absolute height of their power. It's terrifying, it's beautiful, it's funny, it's sad, it's got some of the best characters in the entire series. There's so many great moments. I always think of the "they look like monsters to you" scene when I think about Silent Hill, because it's just an unbelievably conceptually terrifying scene. Silent Hill 2 is kind of the famous, like, oh, it's all a metaphor one, but I think Silent Hill 3 does that at least as good. It's an incredible game, it's beautiful, and it's some of the most important people in horror just working at the absolute height of their power and influence. It's an unbelievable experience.
That's so true, and I never think about it that way, but that is absolutely what it is. Like, when you said confidence, like, that is so what that game exudes. The first one, you know, is beloved for kind of the opposite of that, where it's like, this is a company that is doing something new and they're trying new things, and it's very rough around the edges, but it's very fresh and it still plays great to this day. I just played it for the first time very early this year or late last year.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, I played it for the first time when I made my Silent Hill Origins video, because halfway through writing the video, or halfway through playing Origins again, which I had played a long time ago, I realized that I needed more context. So the middle of my Silent Hill Origins video shifts and becomes a review for Silent Hill 1, and then goes back to Silent Hill Origins again. And
I don't think I've seen that one.
yeah, it is my best video. I say this all the time.
Then I definitely got to check it out.
Anytime you put me in front of him, like, I've said it on stream a bunch, I've said it in videos a bunch. It is like, it was literally like the 5th video I ever did, and I'm like, fuck, dude, I love that video.
I peaked early.
I did super early. So, that video is fun. But anyway, so yeah, you're absolutely right though. Silent Hill, and then Silent Hill 2 was like definitely a lot more confidence, trying something a little bit different, but still kind of very much just kind of iterating and improving and bringing this to a new system. And then you're absolutely right. By the time they got to Silent Hill 3, it was like, we've played all the songs live, we know what works and what doesn't, and we're just gonna put everything into this new game.
Oh yeah, and you can tell. Like, you start that game, you enter that theme park. I feel like I know what the air there smells like. Yeah. It's such a visceral, like, clear atmosphere. You can feel it. I probably know what it feels like to, like, touch the ground there. I can just imagine it. It's all so clearly communicated, and that's so unbelievably important for a horror game. And every scene in that game is just like that. Like, I could just imagine myself standing there. I could imagine, like, what the temperature there would be, what it would smell like, what it would look like behind me, in front of me, what the ceiling would look like. It doesn't even matter if the game renders it or not. There's just such a clear communication when it comes to atmosphere in that game. Every location is beautifully thought out, and it's an unmissable game. You have to play it. If you like horror and you like the PlayStation 2, this is probably the best it has to offer.
I would probably agree with that. And I'm gonna follow your horror train into my second to last game, a game that I have not done yet on my channel, because I actually played through. There are 2 games that I played through as I was starting my channel, I said I want to backlog myself. I want to play through a litany of games and record it all and the whole deal, and then I will go back and like make videos on those once I already have the footage stockpiled, so that when I start the channel, I can just knock them out. And I lost the footage for those games.
Oh no!
Yes, I did not know what I was doing yet, and I accidentally corrupted those files. And those games were Kuon, which I do not have and will not be bringing out because
Kuon.
I'm not, which sucks because I'm very not excited to play through Kuon again. Like,
I haven't played it ever.
Cool,
I'm so curious.
Cool game. You should absolutely play it at once. But as far as like playing that again, I'm like, oh god.
It's I imagine like every other early From Software game, infuriating.
The second game that I played and lost the footage of is the next game on my list, which is The Suffering.
That's the jail one,
yes,
right?
Yes.
I've played a bit of that a very long time ago. I think am I hallucinating, or is there a DS port of The Suffering?
There could be.
Am I thinking of something else? The box art is like a hand coming out of a face.
No, that's not The Suffering.
That's Dementium.
Yes, Dementium. Okay. So, which is also on my list of games to play. So, The Suffering is this. It was published by Midway. It was made by Surreal Software, who did the Fellowship of the Ring game, and they are. So, The Suffering is kind of like. So, I'm a big horror movie fan, specifically like old school horror movie fan, to the surprise of no one. And it is when you talk about horror movies, like you'll say, like you talk about like what do you think are the best horror movies or whatever, and people will give you a list of the best ones and whatever. And, you've got this list of all these games or all these movies that everybody knows of, The Shining, et cetera, et cetera. Like, The Shining, in my opinion, might be, like, the best horror movie of all time. But it's also kind of boring to talk about because who doesn't agree with that? And whatever. So then, below that, though, you have the movies that when you talk to a horror fan and you really go through their collection and you find the stuff that, like, they're really passionate about, that's like really, really incredible, that just doesn't really get the shine, no pun intended, of like the bigger more impactful movies. So like for me with horror movies, that would be a movie like The Burning or Intruder, or like these like really, really cool horror movies from the 80s that like people don't really talk about anymore, but I think are perfect. Like I think The Burning one is essentially Friday the 13th.
Burning is wonderful. That's a really great one.
Okay.
I like a lot of Italian horror films. There are so many like giallos that I'm just so passionate about that I never hear anyone mention.
Absolutely. The Suffering is that for me with horror games, where it's like The Suffering is this beautiful, incredible, like astounding piece of horror gaming that just isn't able to get quite the headline or the trophy that a game like Silent Hill 3 is going to have. And I do think that like Silent Hill 3 does deserve where it is. So but to follow the same analogy, Silent Hill 3 would be like The Shining or Nightmare on Elm Street or, whatever. And The Suffering is like that other really cool shit like Maniac or like some other like incredible thing where it's like, yeah. I recognize that like this can't be as good as these masterpieces, but on a different scale, like this is it. And
is it also kind of similar in that it doesn't necessarily reach for the type of respectability that like a Shining or a Silent Hill would go for?
Big time. This is kind of, it's not, again, it's not like a really edgy manhunt type thing, but it is very much like, like this guy is on death row for like murdering his family or some shit, and then like
Okay, we're back in the edge zone.
But we are not quite on the edge completely, because at the end of the game, like you start to get the feeling that that the protagonist isn't actually a family killer, and you kind of start putting, I don't want to give it away, but it's not exactly like, you're not like exactly you're kind of an anti-hero. But yeah, there's like super like crazy like stuff that starts happening, and there's like supernatural shit starts happening in the prison, and there's also versions of like fighting his demons, kind of like Silent Hill, but not with the candor, I guess, of Silent Hill. And it's my favorite action horror game. It is like it's not action horror in the way that I don't enjoy that a lot of games have. Like I always say Extermination. I fucking hate Extermination. And it's like the Extermination and Cold Fear are examples of like action horror that I think is lame. This is too action. It's not horror enough, and the action mechanics suck. Whereas The Suffering is a lot more like, it kind of feels similar to a Resident Evil 4 kind of in vibe, but it's not as rootin' tootin', if that makes sense. Like, it's a little bit more blunt. It's a little bit dirtier. And yeah, there's a sequel, which I have not played yet. I'm very excited to do that. I will be doing that as soon as possible. But yeah, The Suffering is absolutely, like, it is my favorite action horror game. Like, I would say, like, Resident Evil 4, Dead Space, and The Suffering are, like, my perfect trio of action horror games. So I definitely...
It's been on my list for a while. It's one of those games I've seen gameplay of, and I've always gone like, oh, that looks neat. That looks like I would probably like it. Looks fun. Kind of reminds me of those Evil Dead licensed games, if you've ever played those.
Totally.
Like the ones on PlayStation 2.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I haven't played those, but yeah, I mean, the character's name is Torque. Like, it's
excellent name.
And like, yeah, it is very much like it is the ultimate like B movie that is done just as well as any AAA experience.
That sounds good. I'm gonna check this out. This is going on my long list of games I still have to play. All right. Well, I have a big switch in tone, because my last game is Ico from Team Ico.
There we go.
A really quiet little game where you play as a boy who meets a girl, and you try to escape a big, mysterious, almost unknowable castle. Have you played this before?
I have played, I think, the opening of Ico a long time ago out of curiosity, because Hidetaka Miyazaki, who created Dark Souls, says that Ico is the game that he played that made him want to start making games.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I can kind of see that. There's a oppressiveness to the structures in Ico that I imagine have in some way inspired Dark Souls a little bit.
Every single time I see it, like at a game store, it's always a little bit too expensive, but it's always like, oh man, I really want that. Like, and I could play it on an emulator, and I'm sure I will, but like, that's just one of those games that I want. You know what I mean?
It's a game you should want. It's an experience that has not been replicated by anything else, I don't think. There's a lot of games on this list that we've mentioned before that are like probably better than any other games, but where we can go, oh, it's like this or it's like that. Ico isn't like that. It came out pretty early on, like 2001, 2, 3, like pretty early in the 2000s. It's been a long time since it's been released, and there is still nothing that feels like Ico. It's one of those things that where if you would even try to, people would just go, this feels like Ico. It's got a very singular identity that's kind of impossible to even iterate on, because Ico kind of does everything with it that it can do with it. It's an experience that can only be a video game. You could never make like a movie of it. There there's just this big structure. It's a big castle. You walk around, you try to escape it, and it's imposing in a way that's really effectively communicated by the way you can control the camera. Camera's really weird in this game. It can just kind of go off on its own. It's almost like you're flying around in a drone. It's obviously got limits, but you can just like leave your character behind and like look up or look down or look left and look right. And this castle, it's everywhere. No matter where you look with this camera, that's more freeing in what you can do with it than almost any other camera in any other game. You can never escape the castle. It's always there surrounding you. And walking around in that, being this little kid trying to get this other little kid across everything, and then like stumbling and climbing and falling and failing and trying again, is such an unbelievably effective way to communicate how like stuck you are in that environment. And that's something you can only do in a game. And it's again also a kind of experience that is not directly satisfying and thus a pretty big risk to make like a big expensive game about. And that's something you could only do on the PlayStation 2, where graphical capabilities and budgets kind of came together in this perfect alliance to make experiences like Ico that just cannot be replicated because of how unique they were, but also because of the ecosystem that just doesn't exist anymore. There's so many little things in Ico that I'm never gonna forget. The way you save at that game is by sitting on these big stone benches that are everywhere in the castle, but you can only save when both characters, the boy that you play as and the little girl he's trying to save, are sitting on it. So when you sit on it, you have to yell out like you can do in, I don't know, Luigi's Mansion, and then your little girl character walks up to you and she sits next to you, and then the menu pops up and this beautiful little song, I don't even know what instrument it uses, but this beautiful relaxing song plays, and it doesn't sound like anything else in the game, and it's just this beautiful knowable retrieve from that castle setting you're stuck in. It creates all these feelings in you that really no other game, even later games that Team Ico made, have ever been able to make me feel, at least. And I think that's incredibly valuable, and that's why I think you should play it if you've got a PlayStation 2. It's a beautiful experience.
Do you have any thoughts on the Blue Point remaster?
I don't like remasters in general. I never think they quite capture the same feeling as the original. There's always a kind of limit you're working with, especially if you're making a PlayStation 2 game. You can do pretty much anything, but you can't do everything. And I think trying to approach a game with now pretty much like infinite everything, you can never like recapture that same feeling because you don't have the same restrictions. Totally. I think Ico is perfect the way it is on the PlayStation 2. I think the detail of textures on the PlayStation 2 are exactly what that game needs to communicate its repetition in location and structure. It's I think a game that's best experienced on PlayStation 2. It's perfectly made. It should have been made in the time that it was made in, and it doesn't quite feel the same when you look at the remake.
I remember I tried to play Shadow of the Colossus, and I went, "Oh, these controls are not. I don't like how this feels." And then a friend of mine was like, "Shut up, deal with it. You'll like it. You just have to get used to it." And I was like,
"Yeah, if you get used to it, you kind of come out another person on the other side. It's an unbelievable experience."
And that's what I love. That's what I'm always looking for. Okay. Oh, real quick, Last Guardian. That has been on my list for a long time. Have you played that? And what do you think?
Played it.
Oh, you haven't played
no,
it? Okay.
I've never owned a PlayStation 3. I haven't played it. Looks interesting. I'm sure it's good.
Perfect.
What's your last game? I'm curious.
Last game. Here we go. Last game is. I didn't mean to double up on. I did not mean to double up on publishers, but I guess I'm not I'm doubling up on publishers, not developers. So this is Max Payne. Published
the first one,
the first Max Payne.
Oh,
published by Rockstar, however, famously developed by Sam Lake and Remedy.
My boy Sam.
Yes,
I've recently gotten obsessed with them after Alan Wake 2 kind of changed my life, and I can't stop thinking about it.
Did you play that on Switch?
No. I use the computer that I'm using to talk to you
played
right
it on
now.
PC. Okay, got it. When it comes to Max Payne, what can you say? I guess if you are trying to talk to someone who is getting into the PlayStation 2 for the first time, I think that Max Payne is an unbelievably strong choice for a number of reasons. One, every single gaming store on the planet is guaranteed to have a copy for under $5,
That's true, actually.
Yeah.
Now that you mention it, I see Max Payne all the time.
Yeah, yes. This game has been just so manufactured like crazy. It is everywhere. And
It was big, right?
It was
very
huge.
popular when it came out.
it was huge. I think there's even I could be wrong about this. I think there might be a PlayStation 1 downgrade of Max Payne as well. Let me see if I'm right about that, because I feel like I have a memory. I have a memory as a kid of it wasn't. Okay, cool. I was just wrong. That's fine. So
That sounds like the type of thing I would have known about.
Yeah,
That
okay.
sounds so interesting.
So
I would have played that before the original.
Don't do that. If a game is made for the PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 3, do not play it on whatever is below that. Like, that's how, like, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, one of my favorite games of all time. The PlayStation 1 version is horrible and like a totally different game.
I love crusty, nasty, downgraded ports. I think they're very charming. But I
can
talked
see
about that in my very first video. I talk about a bunch of like sequels to big PlayStation 2 and 3 games on like the PlayStation Portable, like just like games where you're like, it's not working, but it's cute. I respect the effort. It's neat.
Totally. Speaking of which, I'm really excited to stream. A side note, I'm going to stream at some point the Silent Hill Game Boy version. There's like a Game Boy Silent Hill
The visual
game.
novel or whatever
Yeah.
it is. That's something I need to like. I need to know more about that.
It's like an
That's
hour and a half
I
or
need
something.
that for the survival
Yes.
of myself. I need that information in my brain. I have to know everything about that.
So Max Payne, I played a bunch growing up. Max Payne 1 and 2. I never had a PlayStation 3, so I've not played. Actually, I just got a PlayStation 3 for the first time in my life.
Nice. I kind of want one just for Uncharted, because for some reason those games aren't on anything else.
Yep. So I bought it. So I got a PS3 and I got an unbelievable amount of games. I'm toying
Nice.
around with the idea of doing a video on all the games that I got. We'll see. But so I've only played Max Payne 1 and 2, but I played them a ton, and I think my love of Max Payne, beyond the obvious stuff. I mean, first of all, like, the way that, like, we're talking about a neo-noir pulp detective novel aesthetic, but you add the like over-the-top John Woo bullet time, and then on top of that, you add a unique blend of psychological horror, and all of these things actually work together, which is...
It's a beautiful combination of influences. It's something Remedy has been very good at pretty much since they started making games.
Absolutely. And what's really crazy, I haven't played the very first game that they made that Sam Lake also wrote was a vehicular combat game on the PC called Death Rally, which
I
I'm
heard that name before, but
very
never played
curious
it.
about that. But Max Payne is a game where, like, you know, I think one of the things that you pinpointed that you really like a lot is seeing how the hardware is being pushed, and seeing, you know, the lighting and all the different, like, opulence, I suppose, of like how a game can look, or how you feel, how a game makes you feel. And I agree, and I feel similarly, but one of the things that I think, in retrospect, I've noticed within myself is I love a flow state game. I love a game like Tony Hawk that I can sit down and my hands just move. And I do the same thing. Like, I found that in Dark Souls. I found that in Crash Bandicoot. And Max Payne, in an odd way, also has a very, very satisfying flow state gameplay loop between the different mechanics and the bullet time and all the other stuff. Like it feels amazing to just sit and play. And that's not even to talk about all of the beautiful cinematic elements and writing and acting and Sam Lake's oblong fucking head shape. It's great. And it's the beginning. It's the true beginning of a studio that has, to this day, managed to stay true to themselves and true to their own visions. And even in all of the chaos of that AAA gaming has been in for a while now, and all the chaos of microtransactions and paying and all of these different awful things that game studios have been killed by or subject to, Remedy is this very interesting island that manages to just do their own thing. And everybody is cool with that. And they're great do it well.
Yeah, totally.
Like Max Payne, or not Max Payne, Alan Wake 2, just like it was a cultural moment, man. And
oh yeah, everything you're saying about Max Payne right now, I haven't played Max Payne 1. I'm vaguely familiar with it, but everything you're saying right now is exactly how I felt about Alan Wake 2. It's this beautiful combination of influences, and you can tell there's all these fixations that the team had, and they're just putting it all in, and it just works so well together. There's so many different little things that get sprinkled in, and it becomes something entirely new that I'm sure other people will take influence from in the future. They're a beautiful company, and they make beautiful art. So if what you're saying here is so familiar to me, then I really got to check out Max Payne 1.
It's definitely, I mean, it isn't, you know, I haven't played the Alan Wake games yet. I haven't wanted to play the second one until I play the first one, and the first one's been on my backlog for a while, and it's a whole thing. But I will tell you that Max Payne 1, I mean, this is an action game. Like it is a dirty, grimy, like shoot everything kind of game, but with that kind of Remedy genius. And I also love Control. Control was incredible. I played the shit out of Control.
Yeah, I just beat that.
Oh yeah, I love, dude. So Control, Control probably has one of my top 10 gaming moments of my entire life. Like moments where like my jaw is on the floor the entire time I'm playing it with just pure joy. And it's the fuck, what was it? Is it the ashtray maze, or the maze where like the song is playing and you're going through all of these rooms that are changing and shooting stuff and whatever?
Oh yeah, there's so much like that. I always remember the hotel room and the clock.
Yeah.
Like the anchor that spawns infinite clocks. Yeah. There's so much weird, interesting stuff in that game. It's so unique. I love the brutalist 1970s office space that somehow never gets boring. The way they light games is also great. This is something they do in both Alan Wake and in Control, and I'm sure they've been doing it for a while, where they light games in a way that games usually aren't lit. Like sometimes a room will just be red, or there will just be some fire, and it will be like super yellow, and an entire room will just be engulfed in yellow because of a fire. And that's something you do in film with color grading, but games usually don't do this. So it's really fun to see a developer who's clearly very, very influenced by cinema using those things to make games more interesting visually.
That's amazing. Well, that's it. We did it.
We did it.
We did it.
We've been here for a while.
We have been. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, no worries. I love talking about all these games with you.
Tell everybody where they can find you.
I have a YouTube channel. It's called Ruby Falls. That's it.
Hell yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so happy that we could do this because A, I had an amazing time. B, this is the first one of these that I've done. This is a new thing that I'm trying where I'm just like collaborating with people who I like and want to talk about stuff with. And I have no idea. I have no fucking idea how this video is going to go. As far as like viewership, I have no idea. It's a little different, so we'll see, but I don't care because this was amazing and I had a great time.
Me too. It's fun. All right.